Welcome back to the Legacy Radio Network. I'm your host, Dennis Tubbergen. This is the Everything Financial Radio Show, and we are chatting with Mr. Ian Gordon of the Long Wave Group. And Ian, if one of our listeners wanted to learn a bit more about your work, tell them where they could go to learn a bit more.
They can go onto the website, longwavegroup.com, and as of January 1, actually it can go on now, but as of January 1, it's going to be a free website. Right now it's a subscription website, but anyone who goes on it right now doesn't have to subscribe anyway, so because we're pulling off the subscription. So just longwavegroup.com, and I think, even though I say it myself, I think it's a very interesting website, particularly from a historical perspective.
Well, Ian, that's a great segue into what I wanted to talk about, because we have chatted in the past that, paper money, historically speaking, never lasts. Fiat currencies have a 100% track record in failing. In fact, before we started to record our conversation today, you mentioned that you actually have a paper money collection, and all the bills in your collection are all failed currencies. So tell us a bit about what's happened in the past when policymakers have printed money like the Federal Reserve and so many of the other central banks around the world are now doing. How does this ultimately play out?
Well, and the examples that I've used in the past on your show, Dennis, and I think because they're the most, from our perspective, the most relevant, are two French examples. You've got the John Law scheme in sort of 1719 to approximately 1721 in France. John Law was a Scotsman, but to be convinced the French ruler that they should have a paper money system, and that that paper money scheme was sort of evolved around a stock market scheme at the same time, the Mississippi stock market. So you had, because of all this money printing that John Law was doing, you had a massive speculation in stocks around. French owned the territory, the Mississippi Territory in the United States at that time. So, and eventually, what happens when you print so much paper money, confidence starts to be eroded in the value of the money, and people start to sort of even in the early days of the John Law scheme, you could actually swap your paper for gold or silver at the bank, and as so much paper money got printed, people started to take their paper money and go to the Bank Royal in France and exchange their paper for gold because they didn't trust the paper money anymore because so much of it was being created, and eventually the whole system sort of collapsed. And the farmers didn't want to deliver their produce into Paris and be paid in paper, and the government tried to force the payment in paper and to outlaw payment in precious metals, and anyone demanding payment in precious metals could be executed, and this kind of things. But so the whole system, effectively, in John Law's period, the whole paper money system collapsed. The Mississippi bubble also collapsed because no one wanted to be paid in paper for their paper stock values and so on. So, and eventually the French government returned to precious metals as money. And the same occurred again in France in the French Revolutionary period in the late 1790s when the revolutionaries started to print paper money, the assignats. They supposedly backed that paper money with church lands and so on, but they printed so many assignats that, again, the confidence in paper money started to be lost, and you had the same kind of thing, people refusing to accept paper money in payment. And again, the government tried to force, the paper money, outlawed precious metals as a medium of exchange, executed people who demanded payment in precious metals. So eventually the farmers just refused to bring their produce into Paris, so the Parisians were going hungry, and so they were demanding, a return to sort of good money, sound money. And again, Napoleon came to power and introduced gold and silver as the money of France. And so again, you have an example of a paper money system that just collapses once confidence is lost in the paper money. People just give up on it and want to go to something else. And governments, create so much of it because there's no discipline behind the paper money. So even, when Britain was on a gold standard system, effectively from 1717, in the later stages, there was still paper money. You didn't have to carry around gold and silver in your wallet and in your purse or whatever. You could still have paper, but everybody knew that paper was redeemable in gold and silver at the Bank of England if they wanted to redeem it. And so that you had paper money, but it was instantly redeemable in gold. And so the pound always maintained its value essentially all the way through for almost 200 years. And what happened was when the First World War was declared, when war was declared at the onset of the First World War, all the combatants went off gold. And that was the end, essentially, of a gold standard system that effectively most of the countries in the world were on a gold standard system at that time. So because they needed to print money, they went off gold. You couldn't exchange your paper for gold. And the whole system collapsed. And so effectively you could argue that since the First World War, we've been subjected to a paper money system. We know that after the First World War there was a return to a quasi-gold standard, but that only lasted for 4 or 5 years. And that whole monetary system collapsed in 1931. And so Britain went off gold in 1931 because so many people were taking their pounds and exchanging it for British gold that they were running out of gold to support the pound. So they left the gold standard system or the gold exchange standard system in 1931, and the whole system, the whole monetary system of the world collapsed between 1931 and 33. Even the mighty United States, the world's greatest creditor nation with a huge amount of gold, was forced off gold by 1933, simply because people just didn't believe that the American dollar would remain on gold, so they exchanged their dollars for American gold, and America was running out of gold. So that monetary system collapsed. And so you can say, well, from then on, we were certainly on a paper monetary system, although from Bretton Woods in 1944, America did go on to, you could argue, a gold standard. The dollar was backed by gold at $35 an ounce, but it wasn't a true gold standard because people themselves, Americans, weren't even allowed to own gold. So you couldn't go into any bank and exchange your paper dollars at $35 for an ounce of gold. Only countries could do that. And then when Vietnam War really, America had to sort of fund the Vietnam War, so they started to print dollars to fund that war, forcing in 1971 Richard Nixon to take them completely off gold. So, that's a very quick history of the paper money, but you could say that as far back as the First World War, certainly after the monetary crisis of 1931-33, and then following Nixon closing the gold window in August 1971, you can say that since that time we've been on a fiat paper money system. The entire world has been subjected to this fiat paper money system. Well, what fiat paper money is it's also debt money, so that all the paper money that we create is actually debt money, so that we've created a massive amount of paper money, which has led to a massive amount of debt that's being created in the world, and that's really what's starting to sort of collapse worldwide, is the paper money systems of the world are starting to collapse, essentially where we see the initial stages of that collapse are now in Europe, but eventually, just like the monetary crisis of 1931-33, you're going to see the focus, once the euro collapses, you're going to see the focus of attention turned on countries like the United Kingdom and the United States, and their currencies will be subjected to tremendous speculation and interest rates in those countries, just as they have been in Greece and Spain and so on. Interest rates will be forced up in these countries, as well as speculators turn and say that these currencies will also collapse.
Ian, we've got about 2.5 minutes left. In the time we have left, give me your take on the likelier of these two outcomes. Does the Federal Reserve in the United States continue to print money until people lose confidence in the U.S. dollar and we have a currency crisis? Or, on the other hand, at some point, does maybe when Bernanke's term is up, which means we'd have to get through another couple years, do we see them say, hey, wait a minute, printing money doesn't work, and now we go into a deflationary time frame? We now go back to maybe more honest money, and we see interest rates spike. Well, what's the more likely of those two outcomes?
I'm pretty confident that we will return to some sort of gold-backed monetary system worldwide, and I suspect that just as Britain was the initiator of a gold-backed system in 1717 when Sir Isaac Newton was Master of the Mint, I think that will come from China. China's accumulating gold at a tremendous clip, so that, and I think she will at some stage have a sufficient amount of gold to be able to say that the renminbi or the yuan is now backed by gold. So, and that's going to force all countries back into a gold standard system. And I think the danger is that some of these countries don't have the gold that they purport to have to back their currencies, and that's going to lead to a tremendous amount of upheaval until the system can be sort of properly instituted worldwide. But the initial stages of collapse are going to be very, very devastating.
Ian Gordon of the Long Wave Group, we're going to have to leave it there today. Appreciate you joining us. Hope you'll come back.
Well, thank you for having me.
This is Everything Financial Radio. We will return after these words. Stay with us.